Hello and welcome back to another episode of the Injury Law Pod. I am your host, Eric Bartlett, 28-year personal injury lawyer. And this is the podcast where we talk about all things personal injury law related. And up today, we are going to talk about a situation that all of us as drivers have encountered. And it's interesting because there's viewpoints on both sides. And it's the issue of temporary tags. So, as you probably know, if you go buy a vehicle from a dealer, you have the option of getting a temporary tag. In Missouri, it's for 30 days. In Kansas, it's for 60 days. And what that allows you to do is drive the vehicle for that amount of time before officially registering it. And what it also allows you to do is potentially hold off on getting insurance on that vehicle for that amount of time. Most insurance policies, if you have a current insurance policy in place, any new vehicle you purchase is covered for the first 30 days after your purchase. So you don't have to officially register it with the insurance company to have the same coverage you have on other vehicles. But as we've seen in recent times, there are a lot of these temporary tags that are long since expired, but are still being driven out on the roadways on the vehicle that was purchased maybe months ago. And so, there's two sides to the coin, which obviously I believe probably the majority of people get frustrated seeing so many expired tags because people feel like, look, if you have the money to buy the car, you need to have the 10% basically of that purchase price to go pay the sales tax on the car and get it appropriately registered. And of course, when you register it, you have to show that you have insurance on that vehicle. And so, obviously, what is happening is people are buying the car and then they don't have the money to pay the sales tax and probably get it properly insured. And so it's a real problem out there. It had become a bigger problem. I mean, there was every time I know I was in a vehicle driving somewhere, I would see expired tags. And again, some of them are just so blatantly expired. You might be driving around in July and see something from December of the previous year. And so, on the one hand, again, I think the majority of people are of the mindset if you've got the money or you get the loan to buy the car, you need to make sure you're going to have the money to properly register it and have insurance on that car. And on the other side of it, people will talk about the fact that unfortunately, as we all know, transportation is critical to most of us because it allows us to get to our jobs, get to potentially an educational facility, something like that, something that's helping us either survive or do better for ourselves. And, the folks are going out there, they're getting the car so that they have that transportation, but then they just cannot come up with the extra money to pay the sales tax, get it properly insured, and be legal with the vehicle. So recently, that brings us to the fact that Missouri has passed a law which goes into effect this month, which will now require if you buy a car from a dealer, you will have to pay the sales tax at the time of purchase. And so essentially, you will get a sort of temporary tag, but it's more of a permanent tag until your actual license plates come to you in the mail. And what this is obviously aiming to do is avoid people buying cars and then never registering them and driving around, again, usually uninsured, which exposes everybody on the roadways to a potential problem. Because if you've got a car out there that doesn't have the appropriate insurance coverage, then if that car causes an accident or the driver of that car causes an accident, that can leave the person that was injured in a real bind. Now, we're going to break this down a little more as to how to protect yourself from that situation. But right now, you just need to know that Missouri is taking an active step to avoid a lot of these vehicles rolling around on the roadways without appropriate insurance coverage and without the appropriate registration. Every day in our practice, we see people, we represent people that are hit by somebody that does not have insurance. And usually the people that are reaching out to us, they have insurance on their vehicle. And so under both Missouri and Kansas law, if you have an insurance policy on your vehicle, you will have protection for somebody that causes an accident, causes you property damage, causes you injury. You'll have protection if the other driver doesn't have insurance. Now, I should say, you won't always have the coverage for your vehicle if you didn't purchase specific coverage for your vehicle. You have to have collision coverage on your automobile insurance policy in the event somebody that's uninsured damages your vehicle. So it's crucial, and you have to make the decision if you're going to forego that coverage because you think the value of your vehicle doesn't justify the premiums that you're going to be paying monthly to have that vehicle covered for property damage, you have to make the decision at that point. If somebody causes an accident, it either significantly damages your vehicle to where the cost of repairs is going to be high, or it totals out your vehicle because the cost of repairs exceeds the value of your vehicle. Again, you're making that decision that you're going to be ready to eat that cost and go buy another vehicle. So you have to weigh what the savings is on the one side if you're not going to get that coverage as against the cost of replacing your vehicle. And so their financial people will tell you it does make sense in certain situations based on the value of the vehicle you're driving, but it only makes sense if you can afford to completely lose the vehicle that you have and you can go out and replace it. So that is the critical analysis that you have to do when you make that decision. But on the injury side, if you have liability only, that means you've got some amount of insurance in place to cover somebody else's damage if you cause an accident, then you will also, by law, have uninsured motorist coverage to protect you if an uninsured motorist causes an accident, involves you, and you're hurt. So that's the positive news. You're going to be covered if you have insurance, if you are hurt in an accident. But again, then we get into how much do you have, right? And we'll talk about that a little more as well. The other thing to take into consideration is that, again, usually the people that are driving around with expired tags financially just don't have any real assets and they may not be making a lot of money at their job. And so the reality is you will never get any money out of that person to cover the damages that they've caused out of an accident. That is the sad reality of the way the world works, because sure, you can sue them, you can get a judgment against them. A judge can sign a judgment saying they owe you whatever amount it is. Let's say it's $1 million. But the reality is they're going to file for bankruptcy if that happens, and that judgment is going to be taken away. There are only very limited exceptions where someone cannot take out a judgment in bankruptcy. And so, again, you've got a person that doesn't have the financial means to cover your damages. And if they don't have insurance, then again, you got to make sure you've protected yourself. So, how do you do that? Well, number one is uninsured motorist coverage. And here's what I always tell people: you really can't have enough, because the state financial responsibility laws only require you to have $25,000 of coverage to be legal on the roadways. And if you've seen the cost of medical bills anytime recently, you're going to understand that even something as simple as an emergency room visit, if they do any scans on you, any other enhanced treatment there at the emergency room, you're quickly going to be looking at a potential $10 to $25,000 emergency room bill. And so just the emergency room alone could totally use up any uninsured motorist coverage you have if you have the state minimum. And so you've really, again, got to think about this when you're out there and you're insuring your vehicles. What can I really afford? And what I always tell people is start with where you think you can afford. So whatever that looks like for you. Typically, insurance policies for automobiles come at 25,000, 50,000, 100,000, or 250,000. Those are usually the levels that you can purchase. And so if you think you can only afford 25,000, you have to find out what it looks like to get 50,000, because usually that step up just isn't that much. And again, that's an additional $25,000 that could be available to you if you're hurt. And if you think you can afford 50,000, you need to see how much more it is to get 100,000. Again, you may be surprised at how little the premium goes up to double that coverage. And again, going from 50,000 to an additional 50,000 and getting up to $100,000 of uninsured motorist coverage could play a critical role if you're hurt and you're seriously hurt and you're going to be incurring medical bills and you're wanting to get compensated for missed time from work, and you're wanting to get compensated for all of the things you've gone through, all the things you've missed out on, all the harms and the losses that have been experienced by you because of this accident that was somebody else's fault. And, generally we call those harms and losses that don't have dollar figures attached to them, like medical bills or your lost wages. We call those pain and suffering, just as a general term. And usually that's the most critical. The time that you can't now coach your son or daughter's team, their sports team, the inability to help around the house. You couldn't mow your yard for a while. Maybe you had to go out and hire somebody to do that. Maybe it's the anxiety you've experienced after an accident once you're kind of getting back into a vehicle, just all that kind of stuff. You want to be compensated for it. And the only way that that's going to happen if you're hit by somebody that doesn't have insurance is to make sure you've got the insurance in place. And while we're on this topic, we're also going to mention underinsured motorist coverage. And that's the coverage where somebody has insufficient, not enough insurance coverage to fully compensate you for all of the damages that you have because of an accident. And again, pretty easy, right? If somebody's out there and they have the state minimum $25,000 and all of a sudden you have $50,000 in medical bills, well, their coverage isn't going very far to help you out. So again, if you have underinsured motorist coverage, then your own insurance is going to kick in to make up the difference. And one of the key things to remember about underinsured motorist coverage is that typically speaking, the majority of insurance companies, they get a credit for the coverage that you got from the other driver. So, easy way to look at this, let's say you have $50,000 of underinsured motorist coverage. Well, do you really get $50,000 of coverage? No, you don't. If the other driver has 25,000, then you're going to have a potential another $25,000 to make a claim on for your underinsured coverage. The scary part is, let's say you have 50,000 of underinsured coverage and the other driver had 50,000, you have no underinsured coverage available to you. Your insurance company gets a credit for whatever you get from the other driver. So that's why it's really important to have higher limits if you can afford them and to get what you can afford, the highest amount. Because when the rubber hits the road and this happens to you, there's no going back. It's what you had in place at the time. So you've got to make sure you've prepared yourself. Now, one other thing I want to talk about with uninsured motorist coverage, there's a really cool thing in Missouri. You can stack your uninsured motorist coverages. So, what do I mean by that? Let's say you have 3 vehicles that are on the policy. They all have coverage, they all have uninsured motorist coverage. If you have 3 vehicles and let's say you're carrying $100,000 on each one of those vehicles of uninsured motorist coverage, you can add all 3 of those up. So you would have a potential $300,000 available to you out of this accident. So that's a really cool thing in Missouri that you get. And so you got to keep that in mind. The sad reality is a lot of times in today's world, you're better off if the other driver doesn't have any insurance as opposed to if they have the state minimum insurance. Because again, if they have the state minimum, now your uninsured motorist coverage doesn't apply. Your underinsured motorist coverage applies, and you cannot stack underinsured motorist coverage. You can't add up your coverages there. You get one coverage, whatever's on the vehicle that was involved in the accident. And again, your insurance company gets a credit for whatever you get from the other driver. So keep all of that in mind. And again, I just can never stress enough that you've got to protect yourself out on the roadways because you cannot rely on others to do the right thing, to be responsible, to carry insurance, to protect you if they cause you problems. And again, you cannot rely on others to do the right thing, and you're not going to be able to get money from them because they don't have assets. They don't necessarily have a higher paying job where you could garnish their wages. And again, even if you get that judgment and you start garnishing their wages or something like that, they're going to file for bankruptcy and they're going to erase your judgment and you're going to be left with nothing. And I see it all the time. This isn't just something that I'm dreaming up or having as a podcast discussion. This is reality. We see it every week for sure. So protect yourself. And the other scary part is, even if somebody shows insurance like to get their vehicle registered or at the time of purchase or things like that. Again, if you see an expired temporary tag, you just have to assume they probably have not gotten insurance on their vehicle. Like I said earlier, if you buy a vehicle, if for some reason you have an insurance policy in place at the time, then that vehicle's covered for 30 days. But if they let that insurance policy lapse, they don't register their vehicle and they go down the road driving that way, there's no insurance. And again, if they cause a problem, it's going to be a problem for you. So, your takeaway from today's episode is run, don't walk, to take a look at your insurance coverages and make sure you're protecting yourself from the many people that are out on the roadways that don't have insurance or don't have enough. And while there are some laws going into effect to hopefully address the situation and help tighten up this gap that we currently have with people not having insurance and causing accidents, you need to take all the steps you can take to protect yourself. And remember, if you've been in an accident, especially if you see expired tags, things like that, make sure you're taking pictures of the vehicles, taking pictures of that tag, get the police involved, notify your insurance company quickly. You can mention the suspected lack of insurance, things like that. You want to get them involved because they can also work to determine whether that other driver had insurance or not. And again, you may end up having to work through your own insurance company to get your property damage taken care of, and then subsequently addressing injuries, medical bills, lost wages, all that stuff that comes along with this type of an accident situation. Remember, expired temp tags can be a warning sign for uninsured drivers. Missouri and Kansas laws make coverage mandatory, but you've got to make sure you've got enough. Check your policy limits. And again, I can't stress, do it now. If you've heard this podcast, don't wait. Take a look, call the insurance company, see what you can afford. Take the action now so that you're in a good position if the unfortunate situation occurs where you're in an accident caused by an uninsured or underinsured driver. And if you find yourself in that situation, we've been through it many, many times. We're always happy to help. It's a free call. So feel free to reach out and we'll talk to you and we'll see how we can help. Until next time, be safe and be well.